Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I would like to introduce Dr. Sylvia van der Berg. She is the head of immunology at our NRL reference lab. Thank you, Dr. Sylvia.
Thank you, Yolandi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. I'm going to introduce our speaker for tonight. Dr. Miller Rousseau is a medical doctor and consultant chemical pathologist with a background in clinical medicine, laboratory diagnostics, toxicology, and occupational health. He completed his MBCHB degree at Stellenbosch University in 2012 and specialized in chemical pathology, graduating in 2022 with an MEd degree from the University of Pretoria and an FC Path from the Colleges of Medicine of South Africa. He has postgraduate diplomas in occupational health from the University of the Witwatersrand, as well as Colleges of Medicine diplomas in HIV management and mental health. He currently works as a consultant chemical pathologist at AMPATH Specialized Chemistry Department at the National Reference Laboratory in Pretoria. Today, he will be discussing blood cannabis testing and its relevance in clinical and occupational settings. Thank you, Miller. We're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thanks. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight's talk is a very special one for us as a department and as a laboratory, and it marks the end result of Project CANDO, our 18-month-long journey to develop and validate our very own blood cannabis test. A great deal of time and effort and troubleshooting and teamwork has gone into bringing this test to life, and we're incredibly proud to finally be able to share it with you. This assay reflects our commitment to providing a world-class chromatography service and highly specialized methodology to support accurate and reliable testing to our clients. Blood cannabis testing by chromatography is considered the gold standard approach, and we are proud to now offer this service to our clients. I would also just like to give a special thank you to our scientific team, Marna, Ilandrai, and Helena, for their hard work, dedication, and commitment throughout this project. Their contribution has been absolutely essential. We would also like to sincerely thank all the volunteers who participated in our validation studies. Without their willingness to assist, this project would not have been possible. This test represents an important step forward for us, and we are very proud of what has been achieved. Tonight, I look forward to sharing with you the background, the science, and the practical value of this new blood cannabis assay as we clear the smoke and introduce blood cannabis testing to our clients. All right, so I usually like to start off any type of talk or lecture with a clinical application. So I have created a completely fictional scenario, and you will this situation might sound familiar to somebody or to a doctor that's working with occupational health clients. It might seem completely foreign to others. So I'm going to start off with this completely fictional situation. All right. So meet Johannes. Johannes is a forklift driver at a company with a very strict zero-tolerance drug policy for cannabis use in the workplace. But Johannes is a young person, and over the weekends, he likes to smoke a little bit of weed at home in the privacy of his own home. So when he returned to work, this was not over the weekend, so when he returned to work on Monday, he felt fine. He didn't feel intoxicated, he didn't feel impaired, and he felt fit to perform his duties. Unfortunately, later that day, while operating the forklift, there was an accident, and Johannes was involved. It was his forklift, and some of the company's stock was damaged. So as part of the company's policy and as part of their incident procedure, he was then taken to the occupational health nurse's office, and she requested a urine sample for drug testing. So when she received the results, she saw that the THC metabolite screen, the screening test for urine cannabis was positive, and then the confirmatory urine cannabis test was also positive. So in her experience and according to their policy, she then escalated these results to HR, and he then had to sit for a disciplinary hearing, and disciplinary proceedings followed against him pending possible dismissal because they have this zero tolerance policy. So this brings us to a key question. This was whether this positive cannabis result in the context of a workplace accident and a zero tolerance policy, is this sufficient grounds for a possible dismissal, especially since Johannes stated that he had only used cannabis at home and he did not feel intoxicated. And this is where the complexity of cannabis testing begins. So a few questions that I want to leave with you as we embark on this journey through cannabis testing is, do you think Johannes was impaired at the time of the incident? And then, did the employer prove impairment at the time of that incident? And do we think that a zero tolerance policy is still feasible in 2026? So keep these questions in the back of your mind, and then we will circle back to them towards the end of the talk. So this is the outline and the important points that I want to cover today in my talk. So firstly, we'll be looking at some literature and some correlations from the literature. We'll be looking at the legislation, focusing on the Cannabis for Private Purposes Act and its implications or amendments for the National Road Traffic Act. Then that we'll be looking at the cannabis plant, some of the metabolism aspects of cannabis consumption and toxicological aspects, and then testing. And this is where most of the important parts for this talk comes in, especially blood cannabis. So what sort of the book that we have really leaned on heavy while we were doing our investigations and our research for introducing blood cannabis to our clients was Wigmore on Cannabis. This is a very nice and useful book that looks at all kinds of different and relevant review articles on the field of cannabis testing. So in this book, they grouped different types of studies on cannabis. They had five studies, or they had 5 groups of studies where they investigated the effect of THC or cannabis on driving. So 22 laboratory studies were sort of performed, and then the literature from that was compiled to get an idea of when people were introduced to cannabis in a laboratory setting, what were the effects on driving that could be observed. So there were driving simulating studies, there were close course driving of a motor vehicle, there were actual highway observations that were included in this investigations, and then there were 34 field epidemiological and case control studies of motor vehicle accidents. So what I'm trying to illustrate with this is that cannabis and alcohol have been studied extensively for a long period of time to investigate the effect of this on driving and your driving ability. But to investigate cannabis and alcohol on the same sort of thinking that it is the same type of analyte is a gross oversimplification of these two toxins. They are handled completely different in the body. They're handled completely different in the body, alcohol and cannabis. So cannabis is taking a little bit longer for us to understand and to develop when we compare it to ethanol. So this is a summary of the key points from all these studies that were grouped in Wigmore. So they clearly found that alcohol together with cannabis causes a more significant impairment. They also found that synthetic cannabinoids that were produced in a laboratory, are not detected as regularly as botanical cannabinoids. And synthetic cannabinoids produced in a laboratory causes much more or higher impairment in driving ability. So there are different proposed cutoffs for THC limits. In Canada, for example, they are suggesting, or they are using, limits of 2 to 5 nanograms per mil, and then you will receive a penalty for that, and then a higher penalty if it's more than 5 nanograms per mil. They also found that a blood alcohol level is lowered if the blood contains higher levels of THC, meaning that a lower limit is advised for alcohol if you have more than 2.5 nanograms per mil of THC in your blood. They also found that the accuracy of a visual attention task decreased with increasing THC dosages. And as your THC increases, the involvement of cannabis in fatal road traffic collisions increases. So now we know what the literature says about the link between cannabis and the role it plays in road accidents. So this brings us to what's happening in South Africa. So, signed into law in May 2024, the Cannabis for Private Purposes Act was signed into law. And this essentially allowed adults to now grow, possess, and consume cannabis privately in the privacy of their own home. They have the right to do so in the privacy of their own home. This act also regulates the use or the possession of cannabis by an adult person, but it still prohibits the dealing of cannabis. And this legislation has a direct impact on other laws, and most importantly, on the National Road Traffic Act. So for the rest of the talk, when I mention THC, this is referring to the delta-9 THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and this is the active compound. So this THC means any substance containing the trans delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. This was taken from these proposed amendments in light of this new Cannabis for Private Purposes Act. So when you see THC testing in this act, they are referring to the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. They also talk about reckless or negligent driving or inconsiderate driving may serve as the event that leads to testing, the initial event that leads to testing. And if you're driving while under the influence of an intoxicating liquor, THC, or a drug having a narcotic effect, and other miscellaneous offenses, you will be subjected to being tested for alcohol and cannabis. And also, the National Road Traffic Act states that no person shall refuse that a specimen of blood or a specimen of breath be taken from him or her. They also proposed these cutoffs. So these cutoffs are available on the SAFLI website. I'm not going to go through them, but it's very important that you understand the different types of testing scenarios that requires different cutoff levels. These are printed on our reports when you do request the delta-9 THC from AMPATH. We will be publishing these values to guide you in terms of cutoffs that are recommended. So when you use alcohol, when you test positive for alcohol and THC, your limits are a lot lower than if you are only tested positive for alcohol or THC on its own. And there are different cutoffs proposed for professional drivers or people that are doing safety-sensitive tasks versus just the general public. The general public have higher cutoff levels for alcohol, higher cutoff levels for THC, but they also have lower cutoffs for the delta-9 THC on its own and ethanol. So it's important that when you are investigating somebody, to do the alcohol together with the THC if there is a clinical suspicion. All right, so now we've spoken about what the link is between cannabis and accidents. We've looked at what the law is saying, what the current legislation is saying. But let's go back to the plant where it all started. So cannabis has two main sort of species, the Cannabis sativa plant and the Cannabis indica plant, and they are both, you will see on some of the commercial cannabis products that they will say this is indica or this is sativa, but this basically just refers to the two different phenotypes of these plants. Modern cannabis is a combination of the two plants, and you don't really, genetically, these two plants are not different. So the sativa, Cannabis sativa, is a tall, narrow-leafed plant with these serrated, edged leaves, and it typically grows in the warmer climates like Africa and Southeast Asia. The indica was firstly identified in India, and it's a shorter, broader leaf. So if you do see cannabis growing on the side of the road, I think it would be a nice exercise to see whether you can identify it as sativa or indica. Right, so if we go further into the plant, cannabis is considered a dioecious plant, meaning that there are distinct differences between male and females. So when you look at this little picture here in the corner, you can see the males have these bold little buds that's growing between the stem and the branch, and then the females have these long hairs that's sticking out from these buds in that little wedge or in that little corner. So unfertilized female plants produce the most potent THCA-rich flowers. So the THCA means the tetrahydrocannabinolic acid-rich flowers. And this acid is concentrated on the flowers and the leaves. So I'm going to go back to this picture, and I just want to draw your attention to these little, where I've written THC. So you can see these little protrusions, these little glandulars and little bubbles on the top of these stems. So this is where the THCA, tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, is concentrated. Okay. So unfertilized female plants produce the most potent of these flowers. And then I said that the THCA is concentrated on the flowers and the leaves. So on the leaves, you'll have these tiny little crystal glands on the surfaces of the flowers. They are called trichomes, and they contain terpenes. So very interesting, the terpenes cause the cannabis strains to have different flavors. So you can have these terpenes that gives your cannabis a lavender flavor or a pine flavor or a lemon flavor. So this is where the aromatics of the cannabis is sort of controlled in this little resin that's being produced by the trichomes. So this is very cannabinoid rich, and it contains very high levels of THCA. So what is a cannabinoid? Because there are more than 100 cannabinoids in these plants. A cannabinoid is any chemical compound that interacts with the endocannabinoid system, which I will now refer to as the ECS. The ECS, or the endocannabinoid system, is a central homeostatic regulator, and multiple other systems are involved in the endocannabinoid system. Mainly the central nervous system, the immune system, and the gastrointestinal tract. So the endocannabinoid system has its very own receptors, the cannabinoid receptors. So we have CB1, which is primarily found in the central nervous system. And when this receptor is stimulated, it drives the high. When the CB2 receptor is stimulated, it primarily affects the immune system. So therefore, we can say that CB2 drives the healing. The endocannabinoid system influences your mood, pain, appetite, and memory, as well as your coordination. So THC binds to both CB1 and CB2 receptors, but CBD, the CBD oils, will only bind to the CB2 receptor. How is cannabis consumed? So you have a lot of different ways in which cannabis can be consumed. There is the most common one is a joint that's smoked, or the one that most of us are familiar with. So this is smoking of the flower. So there are some impurities when you are just when this is just dried cannabis. There will be some other non-psychoactive sort of compounds inside the cannabis flowers. This is a very very fast onset and a relatively short duration, and this is because you're inhaling the THC into your lungs, and it then goes directly into the bloodstream, where it then goes and binds to the receptors. Then you also have vapes and concentrates. This has rapid and potent effects. Concentrates can have very high concentrations of THC, a lot more than the normal plants that you will find. Then edibles. So edibles has a delayed onset. These are the brownies or the gummies, and they have a delayed onset, but their effects can last a lot longer, and we will get into why exactly that is. Then further, you also have tinctures and sublinguals. So you can with this form of cannabis, your dosage of the THC can be quite precisely worked out and dosed. And then this works quite fast. This works works faster than if you were to smoke it. But it allows precise dosing. Then you get these hemp-derived isomers. So you would have seen the hemp creams, etc., or different isomers of cannabis. So they are quite complex. It becomes quite a difficult product to group as intoxicating or not. The purity and the type of byproducts that could also be present in this mixture can vary quite dramatically between products. So important, if you do hear about hemp, or if somebody tests positive and for cannabis and they say no, but they're only using hemp for their smoothies or whatever, hemp is any product that has 0.3% THC. So now you've heard me speak about CBD and Delta-9 and all kinds of different words. So I'm going to try and keep this as short and as concise as possible, just so that you are aware where CBD fits in, etc. Just to orientate yourself in terms of the different cannabinoids that's out there. So when you do have a cannabis plant, it will have the CBGA, the cannabigerolic acid, as an acid inside the plant. So we can say that this is sort of the mother, the precursor of the other cannabises, and we can call it Marge Simpson. So then there is an enzymatic process inside the plant that will cause 3 different acids to form. So we have cannabidiolic acid, you have tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, and then you have the cannabichromenic acid. So I'm just going to focus on the CBDA and the THCA. So when the CBDA oil, the cannabidiolic acid, is exposed to heat, it loses a carbon group and it becomes the sweet and innocent CBD, or so we think. So little Lisa Simpson. And that's sort of the end of that little pathway. It ends with the CBD oils or the CBD products that is used. So then tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, when it is exposed to heat or to UV, it loses carbon dioxide, and it forms the delta-9 THC, sort of the bad boy of the cannabinoids, Bart Simpson. And then there's an isomer that we can call Maggie Simpson, so the delta-8 THC. which is not really clinically significant at this stage, but who knows what future investigations or experiments will tell us about the delta-8 THC. So when delta-9 THC is exposed to heat and UV, it becomes cannabinol, or CBN, which is an older degraded form of the delta-9 THC, and we can call that the Homer Simpson of the cannabinoids. This is an analyte that we are able to test for as part of our cannabinoid panel. So if we focus on the Bart-Simpson's leg of this cannabinoid process, delta-9 THC is the psychoactive compound, and this is, as I said, binds to CB1 receptors, and this drives the high. So when this will only be formed after the tetrahydrocannabinolic acid has been exposed to heat and UV. So when this delta-9 THC is inhaled or eaten or whatever, it then forms, it becomes hydroxylated, and it then forms the 11-hydroxy THC. 11-hydroxy THC is an active metabolite. So this metabolite has a very potent psychoactive effect, and it binds aggressively with even a higher affinity to the CB1 receptors. Then once this metabolite degrades further, it becomes THC carboxy. So the THC carboxy is currently our main target when we do cannabis testing. And this is a water-soluble molecule that will be excreted in urine. So delta-9 THC is the primary psychoactive compound found in cannabis. It binds to the CB1 receptors in your endocannabinoid system. And the reason for that is, and if you look at the yellow arrow, it contains this hydroxyl group that interacts directly with the receptors in CB that interacts with the CB1 receptors. And then this will lead to the euphoria, the altered perception, the relaxation, and the changes in appetite that is seen with somebody that has just spoken or that is currently that currently is high on cannabis. So I want you to also just look at the red arrow. It just points to this little methyl group in that position. So when we look at what affects the type of high that you will experience when THC is consumed, it will obviously depend on the dose, the concentration of the delta-9 in whatever form of cannabis you are consuming, how you are consuming it, whether it's eaten or whether it's smoked, then what your individual tolerance is. Some people handle the effects of cannabis a lot better due to chronic use or a lot of previous exposure, the potency and the purity of the product, and then also the presence of other substances like ethanol. So now the 11-hydroxy delta-9 THC, if you look there is still a hydroxyl group with the yellow arrow here on the top. Sorry, there's no pointer on this presentation platform. So if you look at this, it still contains a hydroxyl group, but now there is another hydroxyl group that has bound to that position where only the methyl group was present for the delta-9 THC. This is still an active metabolite, and we are testing for this metabolite as part of our cannabinoid panel that we have now introduced. It's an active metabolite, and it supports recent metabolism and contributes also to the psychoactive effect because of its ability to bind to the CB1 receptor. This suggests, if this is positive, it suggests that the THC that has been absorbed and is undergoing active metabolism. So if the delta hydroxy, if the 11-hydroxy delta 9 THC is positive, the sort of the excuse that people give that it's secondary exposure is not feasible, because this is a metabolite that is formed inside your body, and this will be more elevated in somebody that has eaten the cannabis versus somebody that has inhaled the cannabis. Then the 11-carboxy delta 9 THC. This is an inactive metabolite, and it contains this carboxyl group here by the red arrow. It contains this carboxylic acid group, which does not allow interaction with the CB1 receptor. So this is no longer an active metabolite. This indicates exposure only, but it can also be positive in secondary exposure. So if you do sit too close to somebody that is smoking cannabis, this will be positive in your urine. And we do see that a lot in my current setting, in my current situation, where we do these cannabis testing, the low positives as a result of apparent secondary exposure. This molecule was very handy and is still handy because it can persist for very long inside your circulation. It undergoes glucuronidation, which means that a glucuronic acid is added to the molecule and it becomes water soluble and it's excreted in the urine. All right, so just to quickly summarize the metabolism of cannabis. So it follows first order elimination kinetics, and this means that it's concentration dependent. It's not as easy as ethanol that follows zero order kinetics, where there's a constant amount that's being excreted constantly. So it's more complex. The metabolism of cannabis is more complex than ethanol. So THC is eliminated in 2 phases, and this becomes very important when it comes to the interpretation that the pathologist will do for your delta 9 THC tests. There will be, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So there's an initial rapid increase of your THC after it's used, and then it decreases as well because it's now redistributed into the fat tissue. This is a lipophilic molecule, so it will be absorbed or pulled into the fat tissue from the circulation. Then there's a process of slow and steady release from the fatty tissue back into the blood, where it's then slowly eliminated by the liver. And that explains why low-grade levels of delta 9 THC, the active metabolite, can be detected in heavy chronic users for up to 1 month. So increased cannabis consumption, somebody that uses it a lot at home, it will be longer detected in the blood, and this complicates interpretation. But we have ways around that, and we'll talk about that later on. All right, so this is just a quick summary. So you have here 3 people that are consuming cannabis. So inside this joint, there is the THCA, the acid. Inside this brownie, there's THC acid, and then inside this vape, there's apparently CBD, but who knows what else could be inside this mixture. So the burning of the joint and the baking of this brownie will cause the psychoactive delta 9 THC to be formed. This is then cleared from the blood or from the gut by the liver, and the liver then produces the 11-hydroxy THC. But for edibles, for brownies and cannabis brownies and gummies, there will be a very high 11-hydroxy THC concentration because of the first pass-through effect that goes straight to the liver from your gut as it's being absorbed. Then it goes into the liver, and then the liver produces these high concentrations of the 11-hydroxy THC. And then as time goes on, the THC carboxylic acid is formed, and this is excreted in the urine, feces, and the feces. Then for the CBD or the vapes that you buy from an unregulated seller, there may be traces of contamination with the THCA, this tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, has been described, where somebody claiming to only be using CBD, but unfortunately they do test positive for cannabis when on the traditional cannabis testing. The degradation of CBD follows a completely different route, and the metabolites are not detected on our assay. However, we can detect with our cannabinoid panel the CBD concentration. All right, so I don't want to create the impression that I'm saying cannabis is good or bad, but I think an argument should always include both sides of the coin. So I'm going to quickly touch on some of the benefits and to give you a better understanding of why this new recent fascination with cannabis products. So CBD specifically has gained popularity in recent years, and it's considered a non-intoxicating form of cannabis. It's associated with it has anxiolytic properties, anti-inflammatory, and anticonvulsant effects. So, and this is all because of that stimulation of the CB2 receptor in your endocannabinoid system. It alters pain perception, it influences and improves mood and stress, it can stimulate your appetite, especially for people that are struggling to eat due to end-stage diseases. It can help regulate your sleep-wake cycles, and it can improve your immune function. There's a lot of studies on this and quite interesting. But it's very important that people that are using CBD oils on a regular basis, that they must be aware that it might be contaminated with that THCA, the acid form. And that can then be converted into delta-9 THC, which will test positive, and you can then test positive because there is a sort of a cumulative effect after repeated uses of CBD oil contaminated with THCA. All right, so Lisa isn't that innocent as she once thought. She might also contribute to a positive cannabis test. Right, so just quickly, some very interesting things on the endocannabinoid system. So dysregulation of this system has been linked to some neurodegenerative diseases, chronic inflammation, and mental health disorders, and cannabinoids interact directly with this system. So this system is considered a multi-system therapeutic target rather than a single pathway. So I think in the future we will be seeing a lot more studies that include this system and the relief that stimulation of this system brings to patients affected with these chronic disorders. So cannabis has played a role with chronic pain management, the anti-emetic effects, appetite stimulation, epilepsy, anti-inflammatory, anxiety, sleep disorders, and then it brings relief to spasticity in neurological disorders. And there's emerging evidence for its role in post-traumatic stress disorder, management of migraines, multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease, and then a role in palliation. So now I've covered quite a few aspects of cannabis, but now we are finally arriving at the laboratory aspects of cannabis. So this is sort of a triangle of testing for cannabis. So firstly, to enter this triangle, you will have to have a clinical suspicion or a reason for testing for cannabis. Then, if you have identified the reason why you would like to test for cannabis, I would recommend you start with a screening test. And if your screening test is positive, or if you have any doubt in that result, then we would go for confirmatory testing. And blood cannabis falls in the confirmatory testing section of this pyramid. What are some of the indications for testing for cannabis? So in a clinical setting, somebody working in casualty or in a psychiatric setting, this is somebody that presents with an acute, this could be indicated for somebody that is in an acute setting where there's an acute confusion or a toxidrome that looks like there might be cannabis involved, psychiatric disturbances, somebody that's known with substance use disorder, or if you are monitoring compliance, somebody that has now said they are no longer using cannabis and you want to test and see if that is actually the case. In an occupational setting, it can be done for pre-employment screening as part of your random testing programs as per your policy, or like in Johannes's case, post-incident, or if there's reasonable suspicion, or if somebody is returning to work after you have requested that they stop using cannabis. The tests that are available, if we go up on the little on our little pyramid, we're now at screening tests. So screening tests have always been an extremely attractive option for practitioners, and just because it's quick and you can do it close to the patient, it's however designed to detect the possible presence or the probability of a toxic substance in this person's urine. And it has a very high sensitivity, and a high sensitivity always comes, unfortunately, with false positives. And this is because these tests offer, or they prioritize true positives. So when we look at the sensitivity and specificity of these tests, they will have always high sensitivities, and you might find people that are that test positive who might not actually be positive. Right, so these tests require confirmatory follow-up testing, and this again depends on what you want to do with your result. If this is somebody that you want to, if you're in a legal setting or in an occupational health setting, then you would, and you want to use this test to dismiss somebody or disciplinary actions, it requires confirmation, and then it's also important for you to know that the specificity and the accuracy is not great with any screening test, and it comes with the territory. So you might test positive for cannabis if you have something else in your circulation, CBD, for example. Right, so the screening test is commercially available. You have the urine test, the point of care test, which will give you a positive or a negative result. And then in our laboratory, we offer the quantitative testing, which will give you a value. But this is performed on an immunoassay platform. Then also very popular is the salivary or the oral fluid testing that I know that happens in some occupational settings. And this is also a point of care test. But important to note that this result will only give you a positive or negative result for the oral fluid testing. All right, so let's say Johannes had an oral fluid test done by his nurse. And would this have changed any of the consequences of his case? So just a few words on oral fluid testing. This is rapid and it's non-invasive. So as soon as a test is non-invasive, people tend to prefer that. And what makes it different from urine is that it's able to detect the parent THC molecules. So the active THC can be detected on oral fluid. It correlates very well with recent cannabis exposure, and this is the major drawback for me personally as a chemical pathologist with oral fluid testing, is if you look at the cutoff is way above what is recommended or what has been published in the amendments to the National Road Traffic Act, where we have 2 to 5 nanograms. They have the cutoffs for these. So some of these salivary testings can be as high as 25 to 50 nanograms per mil. And if you're sitting with a screening test that has a very high cutoff, you will run the risk of missing intoxication and mislabeling somebody that is actually not fit for duty. If you want to use these tests for legal or disciplinary decisions, it is important that you have to send them for confirmatory laboratory testing. But we do not have confirmatory testing on saliva, and the reason for that is saliva is very difficult matrix for us to work with in the laboratory, and it's also easy to alter the results. Cannabis intoxication causes a dry mouth firstly, and then patients are encouraged to drink some water because they're now expected to give saliva. But what happens if you have water in your mouth at the time of doing a cannabis saliva test? That result will be even lower, and you're diluting your active molecule even further. So I want people that use salivary testing to be aware of the implications and to make sure that it is performed correctly. Right. Then the top of our pyramid is the confirmatory testing. So confirmatory testing should always be done with chain of custody procedures. And this means that if you were to use this result in a legal setting or in a disciplinary hearing, the laboratory can give you 100% assurance that there was the sample was protected against any beyond any doubt. So, and this is a service that's offered free from AMPATH. You just need to let your depot know that you want to collect a sample as chain of custody, and this goes for urine and for blood cannabis. So we perform chain of custody on chromatographic methods. So we have the gas chromatography, liquid chromatography platforms, and a screening test is never a confirmatory test. It is a presumptive test. And confirmatory testing gives you a definitive identification and quantification beyond any doubt. The indications for confirmatory testing is if you have a positive screening test or if you're uncertain with your screening test result. If you want to use this result for medico-legal or forensic cases, if you want to make a clinical decision and you need to be sure about a specific result, and if the results are, if you are unsure of you're getting a negative urine results but a positive salivary testing, etc., then we would recommend to just send a sample for confirmatory cannabis testing, and it's also indicated for fitness for duty. The advantages of confirmatory testing, it's highly specific. This is the gold standard. And then further, it identifies the exact compound, the parent drug, and its metabolites. And it is able to distinguish between similar drugs. So we can distinguish between CBD and delta-9 and delta-8, etc. And then quantitative results, we can give you a value. We're not going to just give you a positive or negative result. And then you can use those results against whatever cutoff you decide to use in your practice or as part of your policy. It's legally defensible. It's acceptable in courts. It needs to be sent as chain of custody, and it prevents wrongful disciplinary action. The drawbacks, unfortunately, is it's more expensive. The turnaround time takes longer than just a screening test, and it's technically complex, and there's limited availability. So a lot of these diagnostic confirmatory tests are done in referral centers, like here, like in the National Reference Laboratory. So it's centralized. So just a quick summary of cannabis confirmatory testing. So when we look at the urine leg, the metabolite that's identified is the 11-nor-9-carboxy-THC. We do this on the liquid chromatography instrument, and the cutoff is 15 micrograms per liter. For blood, we are identifying the delta-9 THC, but the panel also includes the 11-hydroxy-THC, CBD itself, CBN, the 11-nor-carboxy. So we will be able to detect the same metabolite that you see in the urine. We'll be able to detect that in the blood as well. We can identify the delta-8, and then obviously the delta-9. This is done on our GC triple quad MS, and the levels that we are able to detect is extremely low. We can give you a value, or our limit of quantification on this instrument is 0.25 nanograms per mole. So this is a lot lower than the lowest levels that I've found in the literature that different countries propose for their cutoffs. So an extremely sensitive and specific method that has now been implemented. All right, so in an alternate universe or in the future, what could have been done with Johannes is he could have had his blood taken at the time of the accident. And then we would have known, or we would have gotten a different insight into his into his intoxication state. So currently, if we look at all the commercially available cannabis testing, the THC marker in blood is the best available test, but it is still imperfect, and we'll touch on that quickly. The blood testing detects the psychoactive parent THC compound, and it provides the best current biochemical indication of recent exposure. THC appears quickly in the blood of the use within 0.5 to 2 hours, but it also declines rapidly as well. So the collection time is quite important. And then a lot of emerging evidence supporting molar metabolite ratios have now recently been investigated and published. And we are able to calculate these molar metabolite ratios with our panel of cannabinoids, adding another layer of security to our clients requesting these, the blood delta 9 THC molecule. All right, so when we talk about the molar ratios, we refer to the relationship or the ratio between the delta 9 THC to the carboxylic acid, to the THC carboxylic, the inactive metabolite. And this will guide us towards suggesting a higher or a more recent use. If the THC is lower than the THC carboxy, this suggests past or repeated use. So we'll be able to distinguish even further between previous use and current use. When we look at the ratio between delta 9 THC and 11-hydroxy THC, this can sort of hint towards different, the route of exposure. We'd expect a high 11-hydroxy delta 9 ratio that supports oral or edible exposure to cannabis. So we are also able to do this calculation when we are reporting on our delta 9s. Right. This is just a ratio. This is just a graph to summarize when we would expect the different metabolites to peak. We are able to see all these metabolites on our delta 9 assay. So the delta 9 peaks immediately or minutes after use. You would expect an 11-hydroxy peak to just be a little bit lower, but also form quite quickly as the delta 9 is metabolized by the liver, and then you would have your 11-hydroxy to come later as the 11-hydroxy THC becomes water soluble. All right, some of the drawbacks for cannabis, and I think it's very important that our clients are aware of some of the drawbacks. So THC levels in blood falls dramatically after use, and you can expect a 70 to 90% reduction within hours. And blood is often sampled long after the incident. THC can redistribute into fat, and it can re-enter the blood system at a later stage. Low levels of this THC may persist for an extended period and up to 48 hours. It's important that your sample is collected on ice and that you get consent and that you send it as chain of custody. That being said, blood THC levels are still better than urine and saliva to prove acute intoxication. And what do you know? Johannes got his results back, and it demonstrated that although he had a positive screening test, he had a positive urine confirmatory test, the delta 9 THC was negative. So that that sort of fits in with his story of only using cannabis at home over the weekend, and that he was not intoxicated at the time of the incident. So he got to keep his job. Your take-home message is cannabis testing should always be guided by a clear clinical or occupational indication, and your choice of test directly affects the interpretation and the subsequent actions. Urine and salivary testing may be useful for screening, but it does not reliably confirm impairment. Blood THC testing is the most clinically relevant indication of recent cannabis or current cannabis exposure. So it's valuable when impairment, workplace safety, post-incident assessment, or medical legal decisions are being considered. So people that are in, or if there's anybody in the audience that is involved in policy writing, I think this would be a nice addition to your workplace drug screening policies. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Miller, for a wonderful talk. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. Many of the questions, I believe, have been answered in your talk. So I'm just quickly going to go through some of the questions that I believe wasn't addressed. There's a question that he'd referred to. I presume that's in the metabolism of cannabinoids. Is it about burning or also contact to body heat?
Right. So quite interesting. It is burning. It's not the. It's. I think the temperature that I have now, off the top of my head, is about 200 degrees. So it's definitely burning. Body heat will not cause that acid to now come into your delta 9 THC. So I think if I'm not mistaken, it's about 200 degrees Celsius that will cause that transition from the acid to the active delta 9.
So it's very high temperatures like burning and
yes,
smoking and
burning
baking.
And baking. And that's why brownies are so psychoactive. It's because the burning in the oven causes the THCA in the muffin or the brownie or whatever to convert to the active delta 9. So yeah. External burning.
External burning, yes. So then there's a question, any studies on the dependence of taking cannabis, like for instance, having a headache if you haven't taken any?
So developing an addictive sort of becoming dependent on
yes.
the non-intoxicating compounds. So I don't think that I can't recall any reading about addictive. And also some people even say that cannabis THC is also not addictive. You don't trigger that. There's not that dopamine release that you would expect in chronic addiction. So because it works on a different system. So I would not be worried about becoming addicted to something like CBD oil. For the cannabis itself, I'm not too sure about that, but cannabis isn't associated with that rush of dopamine that you would see in your methamphetamines or your heroin, etc. So I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Okay, so then there's a question, what level of cannabis is allowed in a person's body? Like, for example, if a person is taking it for medical reasons and not for recreation.
Okay, so the cutoffs that I think that we have internationally sort of agreed on, and this is also dictated by SAMPRA. It's a substance abuse. It's an international body. I wrote it down here but SAPRA have said that 15 milligrams, 15 nanograms is sort of the acceptable limit in urine. So 15. I think that if you are using cannabis for a medical reason, to have the doctor's letter, I know there are some documentation that needs to accompany you if you have been prescribed a cannabinoid for your chronic condition. But if these products should ideally not cause intoxication. So the levels that I would expect with these products will not be nearly high enough to be classified as being intoxicated on it. So in the urine, we work with 15. And in the blood, we're recommending 5 as sort of the cutoff. But it also depends on the product that you are using, and we're not expecting CBD, etc., to cause those tests to be positive. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, there was another question, and it's about the detection limit of THC. Your limit of detection, what is that? Because there's a question that can you actually detect up to as low as 1 nanograms per ml?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. And this is sort of a nice opportunity for me to brag about how sensitive our assay actually is. So our limit of detection is 0.125. 0.125 is our limit of detection. So important for you to know the difference between limit of detection and limit of quantification. So limit of detection, we can go that low, but it does not fulfill any of the quality checkpoints that you need to call it your limit of detection. So our limit of detection is 0.25 nanograms per ml. 0.25 nanograms per ml, and then most regulations talk about 2 to 5 nanograms per ml. So we are way below the cutoffs. But the cutoffs and the cutoffs that are recommended is still there's still an ongoing dispute about it. Canada's doing this, the Germans are doing that, Australia's doing this, but and South Africa has their own cutoffs that they recommend. But our assay is able to read at 0.25.
So I presume then that you start reporting from the cutoff value of 0.25 nanograms per milliliter.
Yes. We will then give you a result. If it reads lower than that, your result will be not detected. So we are going to use our limit of quantification as a cutoff for reporting a value and reporting not detected. And then that value that you get, you can then look at your regulation that you want to follow. We are obviously going to recommend the proposed amendments to the National Road Traffic Act. So that will be on your report, and then you can use that value that you get and see what scenario fits your situation best. Was there alcohol? Did you test for alcohol? Is this a professional or a driver or somebody that does safety sensitive tasks? Where does this situation fit in? Because the pathologist will not know that. And we will provide you with some insights if we do see other metabolites that are elevated. We could even suggest that we think this is an oral consumption, or we think this is this is a chronic user, etc. Because we have all those other metabolites that will guide our reporting.
Thank you. I think you've answered Lorinda's question nicely there. I've got a question. Actually, first, a thank you note for your insightful lecture. Thank you for that. Are there guidelines for the interpretation of post-mortem blood samples and or urine samples? Is such analysis reliable? And if so, there are cut-off times after which such analysis would be regarded as unreliable. Thank you.
Yeah, so I knew the post-mortem question would be coming, and my short answer is I'm not a forensic pathologist. So in terms of the processes that follow when it comes to redistribution in a post-mortem sample, I'm not familiar with that process. The fact is we could still provide, we can analyze blood, and our assay has been validated in living humans or in the living. I think pre-mortem is the correct term. But the fact that we have this capability, we are willing to investigate this and but in terms of what happens to cannabis in a corpse is not. I don't know. I don't know what fluid shifts you should be aware of, obviously there will be dilution, there will be leakage, there will be and if you should also use aqueous fluid, eye fluid that you sometimes use for cannabis. I don't know, unfortunately, but I'm open to collaborate on this. I think there's a lot of potential now that we are able to see that whole panel, especially with the forensic side of things. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So forensic pathologists, please take note of this offer. Then last question. What blood tube is used?
Okay, thank you very much for that. So people would always, or I remember when I thought everything was on a yellow top, especially when it comes to drugs, but not for the blood cannabis. So because it's a whole blood assay, we don't want you to send in a yellow top. We don't want we want a gray top, so a fluoride tube. And this is where you usually collect your alcohol on it, your alcohol testing, or your I think glucose is also done on a gray top, and then an EDTA is also accepted. So an EDTA. But the most important thing is once that blood is collected, if it's not collected by an empath sister, and if it's collected in the periphery, please put it on an ice block. It needs to be frozen because these molecules are temperature sensitive. They undergo degradation as it's exposed to heat. So please put it on an ice brick.
Thank you, Miller. Thank you for a fascinating, clear, concise, and engaging talk. I love the Simpson analogy. That was fantastic. So thank you for your time and keeping us busy. And thank you to everybody that attended this webinar. Please have a wonderful evening and enjoy the football for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks.